You'll be dead, sure. But I'm gonna be just fine. We offered you a deal, Mr. Morgan. You should have taken it.
I'm a fool, Mr. Milton.
Not all you boys have quite so many scruples. Old Micah Bell.
Micah? You mean Molly?
Molly O'Shea? Sweated her a couple of times, never talked a word, had to let her go. Micah Bell. We picked him up when you boys came back from the Caribbean, and he's been a good boy ever since.
Did Agent Milton lie to Arthur about Micah working with the Pinkertons? And if so, why? So this is something that has always been a question of mine. And it's not because I like Micah or anything of the sort. If you look at my videos, I try to actually look at all the characters we see in the game and analyze their actions, personality, and pretty much everything else that we tend to evaluate in order to judge the merits of a person's character. And I try to do that in as much of an unbiased or prejudiced way as possible. And honestly, no matter how you slice it, at the end of the day, Micah is still a horrible person. He receives a letter from his brother basically telling him if he ever sees him again, he will kill Micah. Just because the moment he became a father, he vowed to protect his kids from any kind of evil in this world. An evil that he says Micah specifically embodies. That should be enough to tell you how bad of a person Micah is, but it's not. Rockstar gives us plenty of other examples, such as watching him kick the camp dog.
Get out of here, you damn parasite!
I was told you can even find him pushing Jack occasionally around camp. To be honest with you, I tried finding some footage, but I can't find anything that doesn't show Jack being abused by some character that's modded, basically. So whether if you can actually find Micah pushing Jack or not, I've never witnessed it myself, and I've never found pure footage of that. But if it does happen, please let me know where and how you can get that to basically happen. And if you don't mind, maybe consider hitting the subscribe button if you like what you see. But moving on, that is just scratching the surface of Micah. Throughout Beaver Hollow, we see Micah poking fun of Arthur for being sick countless of times, and how Micah enjoys finally being Dutch's lapdog, all too happy to push John and Arthur to the wayside.
And Cowpoke, take it easy. You could do with a vacation,
Again, not a good person. His likability and morality, though, are not the same as his weapon skill or how deadly of a person Micah is. All BS aside, Micah is objectively a very valuable asset. Provided he listens and doesn't go off doing what he does best, tormenting innocent people, he is a skilled gunslinger. And provided if events were different, circumstances were different, I think the duo or even trio between Arthur and Micah, or Arthur, Micah, and John would have been an insane group of men to cross. In a way, an argument can also be made that although Micah liked to, in his own words, annoy Arthur, there isn't any concrete malice from him towards Arthur, at least not at the start of the game. Not to the point where anyone can really definitively say Micah does not like him. Does he see Arthur as a threat at the start? 100%. Does he test the water and continuously back down in the beginning? Not willing to experience firsthand what Arthur's capable of doing? Without a doubt. But the thing is, when it comes to the writing and all the characters presented within this game, just enough is left open to interpretation that some characters, some relationships, some instances can be given the benefit of the doubt or even looked at entirely differently. There's so much ambiguity at times that there's enough credence to theories some people would never expect, other rats beyond just Micah. Some people say, could have been John, could have been Abigail, could have been Pearson, Trelawney. I even heard someone say one time Arthur might have been a snitch himself and went down a rabbit hole. But the point is, there's enough open where you can give the benefit of the doubt in certain instances. And Micah is a very complex character. He's not exactly one-dimensional. He was portrayed so well that a lot of people hate him. It's not unjustified, but it's hard to say for sure if he genuinely respected and liked Arthur at the start of the game. And because of Arthur getting sick and his mentality changing, and him going from doing any and everything that it took to please Dutch and satisfy the gang, to now doing anything and everything he can to save as many lives as he could, in a mind such as Micah, that could be seen as weakness. And just how we can be disappointed in family members, brothers, friends, fathers, cousins, uncles, and we start treating them differently, or we start poking fun at what we perceive as weakness, or if they betrayed us and we're upset about it. Some people like to agitate and lash out. Doing just this fits Micah's personality to a T. In a weird way, if Rockstar chose to expand more on the dynamic and relationship between Micah and Arthur, it may well have been more interesting than the relationship between Arthur and John. Because even Arthur's ruthlessly pragmatic at times. Micah, even when he crossed the line, had Dutch's protection, and there's not a sibling rivalry between Micah and Arthur as there is with Arthur and John. So there's no bringing up the past or irrelevant stuff from your childhood. It's simply your mistakes and what you do at this point in time. Everything that happened as a child is irrelevant. It's all about what you're doing now, how it affects the gang, how it affects us in this current bank robbery, stagecoach robbery, or anything else that they're getting into at the time. But I always wanted to see the relationship, or lack of one, further explored. Mike is only ever seen in a light that agitates Arthur and causes problems, making us hate him all the more. Again, not defending him, I'm just saying how differently some of our opinions may have been swayed by a mission or two where the dynamic between Arthur and Micah is further explored. I mean, think of all the people who, after seeing Micah's reaction when Sean got killed, at least had respect for his weapon handling skills after that mission. They may all hate him still, he still sucks ass as a character, but this simple show of what he can do is enough to garner players' respect as a gunslinger. But going back to Milton, why do I think he would even lie about Micah? Well, let's consider the history and what Milton knows about the gang. Let's do it working backwards. In the final exchange between Milton and Arthur, Milton claims Micah's been the rat the entire time. Arthur, surprised, responds with no. Doesn't he mean Molly?
We offered you a deal, Mr. Morgan. Should have taken it.
I'm a fool, Mr. Milton.
Not all you boys have quite so many scruples. Old Micah Bell,
Micah, you mean Molly?
Molly O'Shea, sweated her a couple of times, never talked a word, had to let her go. Micah Bell, we picked him up when you boys came back from the Caribbean, and he's been a good boy ever since.
Arthur believed it was Molly because Molly herself claimed she was the one feeding information to the Pinkertons out of anger. Dutch wasn't giving her the attention she demanded, so consequently she claims she told the Pinkertons everything. Molly appeared to be drunk and was visibly upset upon this revelation. Needless to say, the mixture of being angry and alcohol leads people to say and do moronic things. She's been sidestepped this entire time, and it appears Dutch only gives his attention to those that could only further his interests at the time. Interests that typically revolves around money or getting the law off of their backs. Molly could very well have felt neglected and powerless to help the gang, powerless to help Dutch, and forced to up and move time and time again. With a final time in the midst of the aftermath of the failed Saint-Denis bank robbery. Angry, and maybe finally feeling she can have one over Dutch, the man that had paid so little attention to her this entire time, her way of getting even was taking credit for the hardship this man has endured, without thinking this may cost her life. Angry, spiteful, vengeful, anything to feel better about ourselves, to get even with those that have made us feel like fools. I don't think it's completely out of the norm for her version of telling Dutch and everyone else around here, fuck you, by admitting all the shit they're being dragged through, all the hardship that they're having to deal with. Yeah, that's thanks to her. An interesting idea to bring up is, even if Milton denied Molly's snitching, we can at least confirm she has been picked up at least once. Milton says he sweated her a few times and Molly did admit to talking, so between the two of them, she had to have been addressed at least once by the Pinkertons. Maybe she was the rat and slowly leaked information, going more and more in depth as Dutch's negligence towards her continued. Maybe, seeing how close Micah was slowly getting to Dutch, she struck up a deal and asked Milton to place Micah as the rat. And as early as Horseshoe Overlook, Micah can be seen sucking up to Dutch, telling him how incredible he is, how special he is, how there's no one that he's ever met that's remotely close to him. Who's to say Micah didn't drive a wedge, making Molly more resentful at the two of them? Revealing to Milton exactly who Micah was, the extent he's willing to go, and admitting he's far more unpredictable and worse than Arthur ever was. I wish there was more information out there tied to how much the world or just the Pinkertons knows about each individual Van der Linde member, and to what extent their affiliation with the gang or even to Dutch is, because it would make a lot of speculation so much easier, and I wouldn't have to constantly refer to this one and only scene where Milton addresses the gang in a somewhat diplomatic way, because in this one interaction, we don't see every single Van der Linde gang member. They're not all present. It looks like Milton's aware of who Dutch, Hosea, and Arthur are. Of course, Hosea is assumed, Arthur, Milton already met, and John, well, he's Rip Van Winkle.
Good day, fine people. Mr. Van der Linde, Mr. Matthews, I presume. And who are you?
Rip Van Winkle.
Huh. Good day, sir.
If we go off of this cutscene alone, Milton appears to have very limited knowledge of each individual gang member, the actual numbers in each individual member's rap sheet, both what they have done on their own volition or tied to other gangs, and then what they have done for this specific gang. And as I said a moment ago, Micah unfortunately is not in this cutscene, which does give credence to Micah working with the Pinkertons sooner rather than later. That is not the timeline Milton gives us though. On the one hand, Micah isn't always present. If Milton said he was working with him all along, long before the Saint Denis bank robbery went downhill, or during the middle of the gang getting involved in the rivalry between the Greys and the Braithwaites, that would have been much more believable because we can't account for what Micah's up to during that time. It's not until Beaver Hollow where we see the most of him, and during the events of Clemens Point, Mike is possibly even working with the O'Driscolls, or at least actively looking for a way to get rid of Arthur, as seen with his lack of enthusiasm upon Arthur's return to camp. Something you would think he would look at as a blessing. Dutch constantly shows an eagerness to deal with Colm any chance he gets. Would this not be the prime opportunity for Micah to come up to Dutch and propose a plan to get rid of his rival once and for all? His rival who crossed the line by kidnapping Arthur, playing them all for a bunch of fools. This gives even more suspicion that he plays a hand in Arthur's kidnapping at the hands of Colm's men from the very start. But let's not get distracted. Guarma, or after Guarma, is where Milton places Micah's cooperation. I find that a little difficult to believe because of a few reasons. You're going to tell me Micah was picked up by the Pinkertons by mistake? This slimy bastard that always has his guard up is fully aware of the heat he and the rest of the gang members returning from Guarma will have on him, managed to slip and get captured? How is he the only one to be captured? Better yet, if he got picked up immediately after Guarma, why would he tell the Pinkertons the gang is hiding out in Lakay Lake and put himself in a position of harm's way? Milton immediately opens fire on the shack.
To arrest you! Come out with your hands up!
Give them to a count of 5, then give them everything. Actually, let them have it.
The same shack Micah himself is hiding in. Unless Milton does what Ross does in the first game and already made up his mind that these are horrible men, horrible people that cannot be trusted or allowed to live, there's no reformation or redemption whatsoever. It's plausible then that Milton promised Micah some kind of clemency, and then here and now saw a golden opportunity to just rid everyone at the same time. And Micah, unknowing Milton, was going to arrive with a full Maxim gun and an entire army set to just kill, placed himself in the shack, unaware of the firepower that Milton was just going to arrive with, or the fact that he was going to be placed in front of said firepower. And with all of that considered, that brings another question. When, if Micah really was working with the Pinkertons, did his cooperation begin? How does this fit within the overall timeline? Milton claims it's after Guarma. I placed his cooperation immediately after returning to the area from Guarma, but right before uniting with everyone at Lakay Lake, which I couldn't find a smooth place to say this in, so I'm gonna say it here. I really do think the Pinkertons finding the entire gang hiding out in the swamps here was Bill's own recklessness.
Well, here you is! Well, I asked everyone I could find, and eventually someone new said you fools were out here!
Especially if you put into account how Milton shows up, and again, Micah being in the shack with everyone else just doesn't make that much sense when you start to break it down. It's much more plausible that after the gang was ambushed at Lakay Lake, sometime while they were relocating from here to Beaver Hollow, Micah was then snatched up by the Pinkertons, and that's when the cooperation with them could have began. But as far as timelines and direct events we witnessed firsthand between Micah being placed in harm's way from the Pinkertons and what Milton claims is the true beginning of Micah's cooperation with them, this would be the most viable option Yet even then, we would be looking over some key details. Just looking at how Milton is during this mission in Lacay Lake, he's visibly agitated, at the end of his wits with this gang of savages, a gang of murderers and thieves that he's tried to reason with, and each time they spit in his face, slapped his olive branch away, and continued on doing something that would only increase their notoriety and consequently the pressure Milton is under to apprehend this gang. After he met with Arthur in Horseshoe Overlook, Milton gave Arthur an opportunity to hand over Dutch and walk away. Arthur instead chose to stay loyal.
We got a problem.
What?
I just met some guys out near the river. A fella named, Milton, and, I don't remember the other fella's name. Ross. Milton and Ross. And they are employees of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. And they know about the train, and they know we're here.
Were you followed back here?
No, they know we're near here. And they want you, Dutch.
And the gang went on to rob a train, shoot up Valentine, go back later and rob the Bank of Valentine, get involved with the rivalry between the Greys and Braithwaites, destroying the history of the local area by shooting up the town of Rhodes and burning down Braithwaite Manor. Events that probably came to Milton's attention after he approached the entire gang at Clemens Point, attempting to reason with them again, asking for just Dutch, and in exchange they will be given 3 days to leave, disappear, and live decent lives somewhere else. He says, in 3 days' time I'll be back with 50 men. Who's to say when he returns? At this point in time, now he finds out Braithwaite Manor was burned down, Rhodes was shot up, and the gang is no longer in the area. Of course, they resettle over in Shady Belle, where they shoot up Shady Belle, take it over from the Lemoyne Raiders, and then get involved with the politics of Saint-Denis, eventually killing Angelo Bronte, attempting to rob the trolley station, accused of stealing from the mayor of Saint-Denis, and even robbed the ferry in the harbor of Saint-Denis, all culminating in them robbing the giant Bank of Saint-Denis, where Milton manages to capture at least Hosea. In the previous interactions, Milton may have talked down to these criminals, but at least he tried to reason with them. Now in the middle of Saint-Denis, his tactics and feelings are very different. As he says, he's given them their chances, they made their decisions, now it's death.
It's over! No more bargains, no more deals.
Mr. Milton, this is America. You can always cut a deal.
I've given you enough chances.
Come on!
And it's here in the middle of Saint-Denis where, for the first time, he arrives with a massive amount of manpower. Pinkertons and law enforcement on every single corner. This was him showing he means business. He will not be taken for a fool. And he follows this up with the second show of power, of strength, of how little he really cares for them or their lives. Horseshoe Overlook in Clemens Point marks 2 points where he tries to reason with them. And the gang is really in a position where they still have members that may not be considered that deadly. They're not entirely all gunslingers, murderers. They may be considered thieves, but they're not to the same caliber as Arthur, Micah, or even Bill or Javier. They're not all enforcers. Going from Clemens Point to Saint-Denis, we see Milton be much more aggressive. He ramps it up because time and again, they spit in his face. This time, while there may be civilians and chances for innocent people to be killed, for the most part, he can take out all the enforcers, all the gunslingers, all the specific murders within the gang here. And yet, they managed to escape. The next time we see him is in Lacay Lake. Everybody in the Vanderlyn gang is huddled into a small, decrepit shack. He has every single one of them right where he wants them, and they're not gonna escape. He even starts off with the countdown, and then he says, forget it, and he gives permission to open fire. Yet again, the Vanderlyn gang manages to escape, with no casualties. The next time we see him, although it's very brief, is when he was just dismissed from having a meeting with Leviticus Cornwall in Annisburg. If the gang is gonna be bold enough to venture into town and shoot the man that is actually directly funding Milton and the Pinkertons to apprehend them, on top of 2 previous instances where they pulled off this miraculous escape, where there was hundreds of men firing upon them and they somehow still managed to outgun these lawmen, these Pinkertons, at least enough to be able to pull together some type of escape. It has to have hammered home to Milton that at the end of the day, these men are incredibly skilled. They are crafty, they are clever. The final moment where Arthur has has to go and save Abigail and Sadie. Yes, he provided some covering fire from a distance for Sadie, but even then, when Sadie disappears into the building, Arthur has to clear waves of men in order to make his way to the building that Sadie disappeared into, which would then mean that even if Arthur is sick, he's not weak. He still has a lot of fight left in him. So even if Arthur's on his dying bed, like so many people are quick to point out, that is true. However, we can't invalidate all the times Arthur is shown to Milton directly. His loyalty lies with Dutch. His loyalty lies to this gang. A gang that's arguably much worse and a bigger threat now than it was before. In Horseshoe Overlook, there was Hosea, there was women, there was children. Beaver Hollow, the gang is a shell of its former self. We're just looking at people like Micah, Javier, Bill, Arthur, John. Sure, Abigail and Jack is still around, but at the end of the day, there's less collateral for the gang as a whole. We just have the enforcers practically remaining. And the enforcers are blowing bridges, pushing the Wapiti Indians into increased aggression towards the United States Army. And Dutch and his goals and intentions are becoming more sporadic by the day. Milton, I believe, would have lied to Arthur in this moment because Arthur still has that fight. Yes, he might be sick, but we don't know when exactly he's going to die. He's loyal to Dutch, but maybe Milton was aware of how much he disliked Micah, and Micah was putting that wedge between Dutch and Arthur. So if Arthur was to escape this room and was to rendezvous with Dutch and the rest of whatever remained of the Vanderlyn gang, that seed of distrust, that seed of betrayal, that seed of disloyalty was starting to be planted. Micah is a skilled gunslinger. Arthur is a skilled gunslinger. This gang, or at least Arthur, believes and loyalty above everything else. It's unfortunate that we really don't know how much Milton knows about each individual gang member, but what he does know is how much Arthur values that relationship, that long-lasting time that he spent with Miss Grimshaw, with Hosea, with Dutch, with John. People that he spent a significant amount of time with. People that he holds near and dear. If Milton's made so many attempts to break the gang by reason or to demolish them through sheer manpower and firepower, and each and every single time he failed, maybe a final attempt was to rot the system from the inside out. Why keep fighting, Arthur? Why not play ball like Micah? Wouldn't that make sense, to sow a little bit of dissension? At the very least, Milton had to be aware of Dutch's increased boldness and aggressiveness, and it's unlike him, so maybe Molly did snitch and did place all this aggression, hatred that Dutch was exhibiting on not him, but on Micah. And it was easier to just tell Arthur that, hey, Micah's been working with us all along. What do you think? It was just an interesting thought that has always came to my mind. Just the way that Milton says it always made me wonder. And it's so easy for us to hate Micah, and it does make a lot of sense, but for Rockstar, the writing and the story and how everything is told within the game, it's almost too much on the nose to be like, yeah, Micah is the one to blame for all of this. Sure, maybe he did play ball, but I don't think it would have been so cut and dry the way it's presented. But let me know what you think. What's your take on that? Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Let's talk down in the comment section. I might even go a little bit more in depth into how Micah worked with the Pinkertons because it's interesting. And this may have also been something Rockstar was intentionally working on because of this little clip of John talking to Charles about Micah being a rat all along.
Micah?
I hope that bastard's dead. You know, he was the one speaking to them agents.
What?
Putting them on us the whole time. Or since before I got off Sisika.
So even John places a timeline different than Milton. And that could be through John's own hatred and dislike towards Micah, where he distorts the timeline and fits it where it makes more sense to Charles, and Charles betrays Micah. It's just interesting all around, but with whatever angle you decide to look at it, Rockstar still intentionally kept that line, John's line, in there for a reason.